Hey y'all! So, in my first video about this whole Johnny Depp and Amber Heard spectacular adventure, my video was primarily about why it's so difficult, I think, for a lot of people to find Amber Heard to be sympathetic in this situation. This video, is Michelle Chatham, and my last video was about why specifically people were struggling so much to find Amber Heard to be sympathetic enough to care about. But this video I want to make more broadly about why everyone should care about this case, particularly women, particularly people that are interested in women's rights. When we talk about women's rights in the 21st century, we talk a lot about a few topics. We talk about things like the wage gap, we talk about things like reproductive rights and concerns and things like that, and while those are very important things, these things that specifically only apply to women, we don't often, when we're thinking in a feminist context, remember that women are people too. Hear me out. The rights that women have and should have respected in the society are, in addition to the specific things that relate to women in particular, also the broader things that are rights that all people have. So, in the United States, we have a constitution, and it enumerates several rights, and corollary to that, we have amendments, and we've had various court cases that have established various other principles to be a matter of rights for citizens of this country. And it's of my opinion that anytime there are attempts to violate the rights of any person, it's a matter of concern for all people. And specifically, when there are attempts by men or patriarchal systems, or men teaming up with patriarchal systems to violate these rights for any particular woman, it's a matter specifically of feminist concern. When I talk about these broader rights we all have, I'm talking about things like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom from religious persecution, freedom to protect ourselves, like, freedom to our right to self-defense, like our right to bear arms in this country. That is an established right that all citizens have. All of these rights matter, and whether it's corporations that are attempting to limit these rights via extra-legal censorship, or it's other individuals attempting to limit these rights by threatening, haranguing, harassing, or extorting us into silence, or whether it's these systems themselves that are trying to limit our participation in exercising these rights that we have, it's an important matter. In this particular case, when we talk about this particular defamation lawsuit against Ms. Heard, what Johnny Depp is allegedly attempting to do is he's trying to attempt to stop her from speaking both about her experiences, which is protected by the First Amendment, but also to speak more broadly about issues of gender-based botherings and problems, which is also protected under the First Amendment. And one thing that I thought was pretty interesting when I was looking into things connected to this case is that one of the defenses that Amber's attorney used in an attempt to get this lawsuit dismissed outright in Virginia, which wound up being unsuccessful, was the anti-SLAPP defense. And basically, SLAPP is an acronym. It stands for strategic lawsuit against public participation. And basically, what happens with a SLAPP suit is an individual will be attempting to speak out. Generally, these refer to speaking out against very powerful entities like the government or a public figure or someone like that. And they will be speaking out in some way, making some sort of protected speech about a matter of public interest or concern. And what this entity will do is they'll attempt to utilize the court system to silence this person, i.e. to violate their First Amendment right to free speech and freedom of the press. With this particular case, initially, Johnny Depp attempted suing not just Amber Heard, but also the Washington Post, which published her op-ed. Something important to know about this op-ed is this op-ed was not an account of her abuse at his hands. This op-ed did not name him. This op-ed did not detail any specific incidents of DV or other IPV that this woman has experienced. This article was actually about the backlash this woman faced from the culture and from the media for coming forward. This article was about the already rampant phenomenon of people choosing not to believe her and to attack him just because she's a woman who's speaking out about something that, in the gender balance, it's 90-10 that women will be victims and not perpetrators of this sort of crime. And that's something that, until 5 minutes ago, was generally well understood by people, particularly feminist people, that when you talk about the subject of IPV, to try to talk about it in some sort of gender-neutral way, like people bother and cost other people sometimes, and it's a bad thing every time that it happens, and any kind of person can be the perpetrator, and any kind of person can be the victim, and any kind of thing can happen to any kind of person. While that is objectively true, statistically, as a matter of probability, it is not true. What is true, if you look at the statistics, if you look at the data, if you look at the studies, overwhelmingly, men perpetrate these kinds of offenses, and women are the victims of their perpetration. As in, if you get 10 cases, 9 cases, that is the dynamic that takes place. And it's not a surprising dynamic if you consider another thing we understood fairly well until 5 minutes ago, that men, on average, on the whole, more likely than not, are bigger, stronger, particularly they have more upper body strength, and they average around 10 times the punching power that women have. That's the thing we understood fairly well until 10 minutes ago, right? Like, as a culture, as a world. By living in the world, interacting with other people, that's the thing that we knew. So, the expectation would be that when you hear about these sorts of things happening, you understand that is the context in which they happen. In this particular case, this woman came forward. She was widely reviled and attacked. Very few people initially believed her because the person who she made accusations about is very well liked, very well loved, very charming, funny. It comes across, some people would say intelligently. I think he comes across pretentious, but nobody asked me. He was my high school crush, you know. But he was the high school crush of a lot of friends of mine, and I'm pretty close in age to Amber. And so are the lines and lines of women every morning waiting outside the courthouse for the opportunity to come in and laugh when he says something funny and boo her when she walks in and occasionally threaten to end her. But nevertheless, back on topic. This whole situation was caused by an op-ed in which he was not named, but no incidents during their marriage were described. And according to the ACLU representative who came in to testify in court not long ago, ACLU lawyers actually looked at this op-ed and, helped Amber to make sure that there were no references, no matter how oblique, to a previous marriage or to this person that would put her in range of being faced with a threat for any kind of credible defamation lawsuit. Which brings us to a SLAPP suit. Strategic lawsuits against defamation are, by definition, not credible. Their primary reason for existing is stopping less powerful people from speaking out against more powerful people or entities. That's their whole purpose. Of the distinguishing characteristics of SLAPP lawsuits, one of them that I found that applied, in my opinion, to this case is, it's called forum shopping. And basically, that is considering all the different possible locations that a suit could be filed in and choosing the location where the lawsuit is filed and where the action takes place based on what place has the most favorable laws, i.e. the weakest anti-SLAPP laws. During the marriage, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard primarily maintained a residence in California. They also, lived for a bit in the UK and took some vacations to Australia. Allegedly some things happened in Australia. But their primary residence was in California. Their divorce was in California. Where they lived most of their marriage was in California. Which makes it a very odd choice for Mr. Depp to want to sue Ms. Heard in Virginia. Except, when I was looking through some things, it turns out that compared to California, Virginia has much weaker anti-SLAPP legislation. And although Amber Heard did attempt to have this lawsuit moved to California, which I think common sense would suggest there'd be more of a matter of appropriate jurisdiction, because the Washington Post was initially a co-defendant and they print out of Virginia, the judge granted to allow this case to remain in Virginia. But, this bit's interesting, the judge did dismiss Depp's motion to have the anti-SLAPP element removed from the case. His grounds for that was that he said it was not a matter of public concern. The judge disagreed with him and agreed with Amber's camp that in this case, that domestic violence is a matter of public concern because the article that she wrote that she's being sued for was talking about a broader societal trend. So the lawsuit proceeds, and as part of her countersuit and part of her defense, Amber Heard is going to be presenting an anti-SLAPP defense, basically. And that is something everyone, I think, particularly women, would be well served to keep in mind. The way that our legal system works in America is that precedent weighs very heavily. So the results of prior cases can and will be used to help determine what's appropriate in further cases going forward. So, if Johnny Depp is successful here, and he successfully manages to find Amber Heard guilty of defamation for writing an article about the experience of facing cultural backlash for identifying herself as a survivor of IPV, what that means is that any other situation where a person, again, 9 times out of 10, a woman, comes forward and says, I am a survivor of IPV, what she's placing herself in line for is a lawsuit from any of her former lovers. and family members for that matter. Because, we're talking about DV, that could be violence from parents, that could be from boyfriends, from husbands, from wives. It could be anyone that you are in a sort of domestic situation with. So the fact that simply stating that you are a survivor of some kind of DV could be considered grounds for a lawsuit from anyone who has ever lived in a house with you is something that should be of concern to more people than just this woman, because it will certainly impact more people than this woman. It's fairly common in this day and age, in a post-Me Too society, for people, predominantly women, because statistically they're predominantly the people that are impacted in this way, to come to social media or some other, form of the press if they have access to it. And even if they're outside of the statute of limitations and therefore not able to take a criminal case to whoever is responsible for them, to reclaim some extent of their narrative. And in this day and age, in a sort of post-Me Too social media world, for people, predominantly women, because of the common demographics that apply, to come forward as a survivor of some kind of accosting of a personal nature. And if we've decided as a society that merely saying something like that has happened to you gives anyone that somebody could maybe guess could have been who you were talking about enough right to decide that's enough for a person to give out to implicate them, and therefore they're going to drag you to court and to be able to win, then this would have to stop, actually. Women, men, anyone saying that they have been accosted by someone who they do not have the grounds to win a criminal suit against would have to stop. Because, bring it back to this case, it wasn't until after the statute of limitations for DV in California had expired that Mr. Depp started to come forward with his alleged claims of being a victim of hers himself. It wasn't until then that he started throwing around these defamation lawsuits. It also wasn't until then that he apparently started jurisdiction hopping. Because if we want to talk about where would he be most likely to win one of these, well, California has very good anti-SLAPP lawsuits. He made sure, even though California was where they lived and maintained a residence during their marriage, that this lawsuit did not happen in California. In the UK, they actually have a reversal to who has the burden of proof in a libel case. Because you see, in the United States, if you're sued for defamation or libel or slander or something like that, then basically how you defend yourself against accusations that you libeled someone is you prove what you said is true. In the UK, it isn't the person who's accused who has to prove that what they're saying is true. The burden of proof is the other way around. So essentially, when Johnny Depp sued The Sun over in the UK, they had a much higher burden of proof than in a similar situation in the United States a newspaper would have had for publishing accusations of some kind. That burden was still met, however. So, essentially, even though he had the upper hand, probably because of forum hopping in the UK, Johnny Depp still lost that case. And over in the US, he attempted to sue not only Amber Heard, but also the Washington Post. Because we have stronger defamation laws, he was not able to maintain the Washington Post as a co-litigant, so he was just able to attempt to sue Ms. Heard. But still, because of the way our laws work in this country with defamation, he not only has to prove that Amber Heard was categorically and maliciously lying, he has to prove she was intentionally lying. And he also has to prove that there were damages as a result of this. Essentially, this is unwinnable for him. I know a lot of people are under the mistaken misapprehension that what Johnny Depp has to prove in this case is that he was abused by Amber Heard. And I would think that too if I was just watching his side of the coverage. But that's not true. He has to prove she was lying about him abusing her. So essentially, he has to prove that he is not guilty of any type of sexual, emotional, physical, psychological, or verbal abuse against Amber Heard. I think we've all heard enough reporting and enough pictures to know. Not only is there no way he's going to do that, I don't even believe he thinks he's going to do that. I think the best explanation for why he's in this legal situation right now, why he's filed this suit, why he's trying to file this suit, is because he hoped that filing a lawsuit for $50 million to a woman who, last I read, her net worth was around $7 million, would be sufficient to scare her out of even attempting to fight this suit, and that in an attempt to settle the matter out of court, she would simply recant any sort of accusations that she's made, apologize for making anybody think that maybe he did something to her, and, go hide under a rock somewhere in shame, publicly branded as a liar. That's the whole point of a SLAPP lawsuit. You don't have to have enough evidence to win. You don't have to think you're going to win. You simply have to have enough money to file it and think that the fear of being crushed by someone who is more influential, better liked, and more wealthy and has more access to resources than you will keep you from even trying to defend yourself. I think that with the wage gap still looking how it looks, and the gap in women being in high positions in industry and corporations, things like that, and in government, more likely than not, if a woman is dealing with a man, statistically, he probably is more wealthy and powerful than her. That doesn't happen all the time, obviously. Not as bad as it used to be, but it's still the case for a lot of women. And the further up the ladder you get, the bigger the gap gets. And, I think it can be easy to get a mistaken sort of view of that as a, poor or working class person, because when you look outside, most of the people are working crappy jobs, and so are their boyfriends and husbands. So, it might look like we live in a more egalitarian kind of situation, but when you hop out of this tax bracket, those differences get very big. Bigger still because, when you hop in the higher tax brackets, women are much more likely to stop working when they have a baby. So, one high income, one no income, there's a whole lot of that. It can get real ugly out here. I think that not only understanding that what's on the line, in addition to her right to speak about this, is everyone's right because our legal system relies on precedent, it's also worth understanding what you see happening in this courtroom to her can happen to you. It happens to regular women all the time, all over the country. It has for years. The little maneuver he pulled where he hired a psychiatrist to give expert testimony on his behalf, and he wined and dined her, and apparently they spent 4 hours drinking and talking before he apparently just gave her something prepared by his lawyers to sign off on a year before even meeting, and deciding in a single session that Ms. Heard is a person that has hysteria. That could happen to you too. And by you, I don't just mean you, wealthy fancy lady who's watching this. I mean you, regular person with a regular job. Because it ain't necessarily that expensive to make this happen. Because you don't have to be able to afford to bribe someone or something sketchy like that to make this happen. We live in a patriarchy. Sexism and psychiatry, very long, very gross history. The diagnosis of histrionic personality disorder came about in 1980, and what it was before that was hysteria. And borderline personality disorder, very closely related to histrionic personality disorder. Lots of overlap in the diagnostic criteria. Also, more than 75% of the time, women are diagnosed with it. Most of the criteria is about how it can be frustrating for other people to deal with, which is why if you were just to type in one of these disorders and just watch the videos on YouTube about them to see what people have to say, you're mostly going to get videos of people talking about their negative experiences with crazy women. Which isn't to say that there are not women that have behaviors that might be problematic to deal with or difficult to deal with in the world. It's not to say that they cannot engage in problematic and emotionally abusive behaviors. It is to say, certainly so can men. So diagnoses that exist only to catch if a woman's acting like that seems like it might not be motivated on anything very useful. And a diagnosis primarily based on other people's experience with you is probably not something that's going to be very clinically useful for you. Because, I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise that there's abysmal, excuse the background noise, abysmal rates of success for treating these disorders when the diagnostic criteria doesn't really include anything about what are the root causes, where do they come from, why specifically people are exhibiting these behaviors. And a lot of research is suggesting it's much more likely that what's actually happening is these women have other issues that are not, crazy lady personality disorder. Like maybe they have bipolar disorder, so they have an actual chemical dysregulation in their moods and emotions causing these behaviors, which is something that's very treatable by, mood stabilizing medications. It could be that they have issues with serious issues with anxiety or depression, which again, very treatable with medication and with therapy. It could be that these behavioral issues are arising most commonly from complex trauma. So, when in situations where if a man and woman were presenting the same situation, if we were to diagnose the man with CPTSD and give him trauma-informed therapy, and then diagnose the woman with borderline personality disorder or histrionic personality disorder, and give her a stigmatizing diagnosis that most say is basically untreatable, so we'll just be wasting her time in therapy. Well, that means that the man that got the diagnosis that wasn't gender-based had a much better chance of actually successfully receiving treatment and getting better and being able to be a healthy person to be around and engage with that didn't engage in these problematic behaviors. And the woman had a much higher chance of maybe bouncing from doctor to doctor, or just bouncing out of the doctor's diagnosis because they diagnosed her with something that a quick Google would tell her is probably crap. Didn't bother with further treatment because she figured it would be useless. Maybe she stuck with it, and because her treatment didn't address her trauma in any meaningful way, her behaviors didn't change. The therapist gets frustrated, she gets frustrated, everybody's wasting time and money. And look at this lady, incurably crazy. That's something you could deal with too. I personally I have not been diagnosed with that, but I did find out when looking through notes from a previous clinician that I did have one that considered it, but ultimately declined a diagnosis, which is what happened with Miss Hurd as well. And I can't help but wonder, given I did eventually wind up with a PTSD diagnosis, if what actually happened with this person is what happened with regular old me, and could have gone worse with either of us, that the symptoms of our trauma were being mistaken for some inherent deficiency of self or personality. That'd be bad for all kinds of people, especially women. Another reason that's worth everybody caring about this is that we're currently living in a situation where there are a lot of unofficial efforts to stymie and limit people's freedom of speech and freedom of the press. We've got big tech making a big show of that, doing a lot of things to, excuse the barking, limit our ability to speak. We've got barking done. We've got, the government making different efforts to pressure different social media companies and things like that. And then we've got the weird social maelstrom of cancel culture when some combination of algorithms and public opinion and cyberbullying turn into this hurricane where, through doxing you, revealing your private information, contacting your employers, seas of harassing communications tempt people into not saying certain things. And if you were just typing Amber Heard's name on this platform we're on right now, you would see predominantly videos about how she is a liar, how she's a crazy person, this entire subgenre and cottage industry of body language analysts whose pseudoscientific non-job is to catch her making facial expressions, occasionally getting annoyed, occasionally looking bored, occasionally writing notes, occasionally breathing, drinking water, eating snacks, wearing glasses, otherwise displaying to you with her body and her acting that she's a liar and that Johnny Depp is truthful as he colors and eats candy in the courtroom. That's a thing that can impact anybody, because I've got to tell you, in my real life, I'm not a person who is described by people who are not well acquainted with me as coming across particularly approachable. I've been told I'm intimidating, kind of intense, that kind of thing. I'm presuming it's based off of my body language. Or maybe my size. I'm like 5'9". Fairly broad shoulders. I'm a sizable person. Not really a teeny tiny little thing. Maybe some combination of it. Maybe it's my look. Maybe it's my aesthetic. Maybe it's all the things. Nevertheless, it's definitely a reality for a lot of women that the way we present ourselves is policed to death. And if we decide as a culture and a society that actually it's okay what Amber Heard is facing right now, all of these criticisms are justified. Any sort of suffering she faced as a result of her decision to marry a creepy old millionaire is something that's her fault. She should be blamed for it. She should face consequences for it. The consequences should never end. She certainly shouldn't be allowed to be done with this person by leaving them. Leading us to another point here. Johnny Depp said on the stand not long ago that if she felt so in danger by him, why didn't she leave? The obvious answer to that question is she did leave, and she got a divorce in a restraining order. So that would be why that's what she did. Women who are not her are asked this all the time. Very common question. If it was so bad, why didn't you leave? Why would you stay? Why would you let him treat you that way? If that really happened, you must have liked it if you let him do that. Because, I mean, there you were right there in the house not going nowhere. Women hear that all the time, not just her. So if you chip in with that, then you are chipping in for anyone who might want to throw that at a woman. All of them suck. And I think the last significant reason why this matters is because she's a person, a real person. I know she's very glamorous and, you know, she's got a fancy career and allegedly a lot of money, more than most of us, but who knows what her real finances look like, especially considering all of this constant litigation. One thing real women, including her, because she's a real woman, she's not a TV character, she's not a movie character, she's not Mira, she's not Homegirl from Gone Girl, she's Amber Heard, who's a real person. A lot of things that real people like her face is exes who won't let go and who attempt to hold on to you and force you to remain in their presence with constant harassing litigation. One form this often takes is the family courts. So we see things like Alec Baldwin's 20-year-long divorce and custody misadventures. When you see things like what Brad and Angelina are going through endlessly in the courts after she left him because, you know, he attacked her and one of her sons stepped in and he hit the kid on the plane. He was drunk. Everyone seems to forget that, but there's a lot of media about how terrible she is trying to keep him from the kids, even though the reality is the older children don't want anything to do with him because he's displayed evidence of allegedly being a violent alcohol user. That's not just going to be a her problem. And if exes are given free reign to forum hop and jurisdiction shop, if you've ever lived or vacationed in places, or if you ever publish something in a newspaper or a magazine or a website, and they can come after you for defamation, and they can come after anyone who publishes your accounts of abuse, and they can essentially just wait out the statute of limitations so that you can actually have them put in prison, and then they don't have to worry about prison if they're found guilty of this thing, just harass you all over the place. Then I assure you, the only woman that will be irritating to be in a world like that is not Amber Heard. It'll be irritating for you too. So, thanks for hearing me out. Have a nice day. Bye guys.